Well, you look at my character and he basically embodies every hero throughout history who stood up, bucked the system and desperately wanted to force a real change. Can you believe that one of the most legendary portals in science fiction history started its life looking like a massive, ugly rubber tyre? Or get this, the famous shimmering water effect was actually a garage science experiment involving a glass of iced tea. But beneath the surface of this cult classic lies a production nightmare fueled by creative risks, major actor drama and design failures that almost shut the whole thing down. We are talking about everything from hazardous costume disasters to desperate last-minute visual overhauls that saved the film. The true story behind the making of Stargate is honestly just as wild and twisty as the movie itself. It is a chaotic saga of backstage experimentation, sheer stubbornness, and happy accidents that completely redefine science fiction for generations. The absolute disaster behind the Stargate's creation. The actual Stargate prop, the literal title character of the film, was a total catastrophe before cameras even started rolling. When the crew first assembled that famous ring with its 22 glyphs, it did not look like alien tech. It looked like a giant spare tyre for a truck. Under the unforgiving studio lights, the flat black paint job made it look dead heavy and completely lacking in cinematic texture. Instead of screaming advanced ancient technology, the prop just felt cheap plastic and totally wrong for the scene. This visual fail sent panic through the set because the entire vibe of the movie hinged on this thing looking powerful and mysterious. Producers knew they had mere days to fix the disaster or risk the movie getting laughed out of Hollywood test screenings and losing all support. So between shooting schedules, the team made a frantic, risky call to spray paint the entire ring a metallic silver, a move that was way more than just a touch-up. That simple change completely transformed how the camera and lighting interacted with every single inch of the massive prop. Suddenly, floodlights, torches, and moonbeams bounced off the metal, creating depth and making the Stargate feel both ancient and futuristic at the same time. Just like that, the ugly tyre transformed into the awe-inspiring portal that commanded the screen and grabbed the audience's attention. This panic-induced fix actually established the entire visual identity for the franchise, going way beyond just this one movie. That silver gate with the glowing chevrons became an icon, showing up in every sequel, TV spin-off, and fan convention for decades. Without that last-minute paint job, Stargate might have flopped hard and faded into total obscurity. Every little design detail helped the audience believe the lie, grounding the crazy fantasy elements with gritty practical realism. But the drama did not stop with the prop issues. The production was a pressure cooker of relentless stress and unpredictable backstage chaos. Just finding the cash to make the film was a monumental nightmare in itself. Every major studio in town had slammed the door on Stargate, claiming sci-fi was dead and way too risky for the market back then. So producers Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin had to go rogue, raising the entire $55 million budget independently. That meant every single delay, creative fight, or technical glitch was not just annoying, it was a direct financial threat to the production. Everything from test screening scores to global distribution deals hinged on that Stargate looking like $1 million. A failure in that one visual element could have literally killed the movie's future in a very real, very expensive way. They built massive sets like Stargate Command and the alien pyramid ship inside the Spruce Goose Dome, which was the largest aluminum dome in the world at the time. That incredible venue was the only thing giving the movie a sense of massive scale that went far beyond its surprisingly modest budget. Even with the space, the crew was bleeding time and money, constantly racing against the clock to put out fires behind the scenes. One of the biggest backstage scandals involved the visual effects supervisor's chaotic role on set. Jeff Oken, the wizard responsible for the digital portal, was reportedly fired and rehired multiple times by director Roland Emmerich. That kind of clash usually spells disaster, but despite the toxic relationship, Okun kept delivering magic under insane pressure. It just goes to show that in Hollywood, sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from moments of pure tension and frustration. The Stargate portal effect ended up breaking new ground in visual effects history. But while they were filming, the crew was flying blind, having no clue if their experiments would actually work or look terrible. The stakes were sky high, but the creative sparks flying during that nightmare phase would change the look of sci-fi forever. By this point, the Stargate was way more than just a piece of the set. It was turning into a symbol of the movie's stubborn resilience against near-total defeat. That constant struggle to get the look right set the vibe for everything else, impacting the actors' performances and the effects work. Trying to make that gate feel alive with zero time and a tight budget created a unique, desperate creative atmosphere on set. That intensity shaped the visuals and ultimately defined the spirit of what the Stargate legacy would come to represent. But the unravelling of this production story is where things get even stranger and way more fascinating. Most of the cast and crew were completely in the dark, having no clue that the massive success of this prop hinged entirely on a random, unlikely source. Believe it or not, the revolutionary breakthrough for the Stargate's visual magic didn't come from a high-tech lab, but started as a weird science experiment right inside a dusty garage. Moving away from the physical gate to that hypnotic, swirling portal, we find a story that's less about traditional Hollywood wizardry and more about desperate improvisation and thinking on your feet. Let's talk about that insane portal effect. Behind every legendary sci-fi moment, there is usually a chaotic backstory filled with failures, happy accidents, and pure genius born out of frustration. In the case of Stargate, that iconic Kawoosh portal wasn't born at industrial light and magic. It was birthed in the most unglamorous setting imaginable, literally just some guy's garage. Visual effects supervisor Jeff O'Koon and cinematographer David Stump were basically mad scientists in there running DIY tests that would eventually define the entire sci-fi aesthetic of the blockbuster. Their high-tech equipment, a small plexiglass tank filled with tap water, and a few scoops of grocery store iced tea powder to cloud it up. To get things moving, they rigged up a wooden beam to a standard power drill and spun the liquid like a chaotic whirlpool. Once the turbulence settled down, a bizarre, beautiful spiral emerged on the surface, what they jokingly called the strudel effect. Oaken remembered that older movies used toxic mercury tanks for mirror effects, but this was safer and way cooler. Struck by inspiration, he decided to film the water from underneath at a sharp, tilted angle to catch the light in a specific way. The footage was absolutely hypnotic, capturing a visual texture that looked alien and completely unlike anything audiences had ever seen on the big screen before. That swirling organic mess became the visual heartbeat of the movie, serving as the foundation for the now legendary Stargate wormhole. It offered a gritty, tactile realism that the primitive computer-generated imagery of 1994 simply couldn't replicate, no matter how much money they threw at it. It was all about physics, real water reacting to real kinetic energy captured with obsessive precision and a lot of patience. But they didn't stop there. The team ramped up the chaos by bringing in an air mortar to blast compressed air directly into the tank to create explosive ripples. They cranked it up to 26 pounds of pressure, which backfired spectacularly. The water exploded outward, completely soaking Oaken from head to toe. Realising that was overkill, they dialed it way down to just over 2 pounds, which finally gave them that controlled, iconic splash they were hunting for. That initial flickering burst of liquid, followed by the water sucking back into a vortex, was the perfect simulation for an interdimensional doorway. Oaken was sweating bullets when he showed the footage to director Roland Emmerich, fully expecting to get fired again. But Emmerich just grinned and called it fantastic. Fast forward a few years, and the team behind the Stargate SG-1 TV series tried to recreate the magic, but they had a major problem. Nobody wrote down the original pressure settings. Their first attempt was a total disaster. They cranked it to 50 pounds, which didn't just splash, it destroyed expensive equipment and flooded the entire studio floor. It took a grueling period of trial and error before they finally figured out the math and managed to approximate the cinematic look of the movie. Even for the show, they stuck with practical water blasts instead of being lazy with digital effects, just to keep that authentic vibe alive. That stubborn commitment to practical effects is what gave the franchise its distinct visual style, making the Stargate feel like a real physical machine. But let's be real, turning those water clips into the full portal sequence was an absolute nightmare of labour-intensive grunt work. They were shooting liquids at speeds up to 120 frames per second, then manually layering those images one by one to build the effect. Rendering the final wormhole sequence on those ancient 90s computers took a staggering 30 full days, a lifetime compared to modern tech, but it gave the film a depth you just can't fake. This obsessive devotion to blending real physical elements with digital tricks helped Stargate stand out in a genre that was becoming overcrowded with cheap-looking effects. But here is the scandalous part. Despite all this genius innovation, Emmerich initially hated the final result and actually fired Okun for a second time. The creative tension between the visionary director and the VFX artist completely boiled over into a full-blown feud. Tempers got so hot that at one point Okun and his colleague Jeff Williams were literally screaming at each other on the studio roof, only to crack up laughing a few minutes later. Eventually, after reworking the colour layers and fixing the compositing, they finally won Emmerich back over, and the effect was cemented in cinema history. The whole ordeal just goes to show the volatile mix of ego conflict and creativity that usually happens behind the scenes of movie magic. If you think the post-production was rough, coordinating the portal effect on the actual physical set was just as much of a headache. They had to rig twin cameras in perfect mirror angles for the actors walking through the gate using high-powered lasers to mark the water planes for later editing. When leading man Kurt Russell found out those lasers could potentially blind someone, he flat out refused to walk through the gate until the crew proved it was safe by standing in the beams themselves first. Even after they proved it, Russell wasn't taking any chances. He kept his eyes shut tight during the take, balancing his personal safety with his character's intense stoicism. That level of paranoia and meticulous attention just proves that every single detail surrounding that portal carried real-world risks and massive stakes. Another massive headache came from the technical nightmare of the morphing effects for the Serpent Guard helmets, a visual trick that was closely tied to the portal's ambitious design. But hold on, before we dive too deep into those secret technical complications, we need to look at the people involved. This saga also peels back the curtain on the human side of the production, specifically the drama swirling around the A-list cast. Their time on set was defined by confusing scripts, heated on-set disputes, and incredibly costly misunderstandings that almost derailed the whole show. Moving from the technical wizardry of the portal to the casting scandals reveals a movie that was fueled just as much by artistic friction as it was by cinematic innovation. Now let's get into the juicy stuff, the casting confusion and the behind-the-scenes clashes. Believe it or not, Kurt Russell's iconic role in Stargate almost never happened, and the reason is shockingly dumb. It all came down to a simple misunderstanding of the script. For the longest time, Kurt Russell was giving this project a hard pass, completely ghosting the role without ever explaining his beef with the production. It turns out the poor guy had been reading an ancient rough draft that wasn't even meant for his eyes, a version that was light years away from the polished script they were actually planning to shoot. Because of this massive mix-up, Russell kept shutting down offers left and right, having zero clue that the project had evolved into something totally different. The filmmakers refused to take no for an answer, though, because locking in a heavy hitter like Russell was absolutely make or break for the movie. You have to remember, without a major Hollywood studio backing Stargate, the foreign investors didn't give a damn about the plot. They needed a marquee name on the poster to sign the checks, and Russell was that guarantee. When they finally managed to get the real shooting script in front of his face, his entire attitude did a 180 with a simple, understated reaction. This is not so bad. That tiny moment of validation was all the producers needed to cut him a check for $7 million, which was a staggering 1/8 of the film's entire $55 million budget. It was money well spent, considering his star power helped Stargate smash the box office, opening at #1 in October of 1994 and proving the gamble paid off. On the flip side of the coin, James Spader was living in a completely different, much unhappier world during production. Spader was coming from the world of highbrow, prestigious cinema And he made it painfully clear to anyone with ears, including the press, that he thought the Stargate script was absolute trash. He was only there for the paycheck, not the art. Weirdly enough, the sheer awfulness of the script became kind of a morbid obsession for him, but that didn't stop his frustration from boiling over every single day on set. Sparda was constantly butting heads with director Roland Emmerich and producer Dean Devlin, fighting them tooth and nail over dialogue lines he felt were cheap, cheesy, or just plain lazy. Unlike Russell, who saw the flaws as just another part of the Hollywood hustle, Spader was having a full-blown internal crisis trying to reconcile his artistic standards with this popcorn flick. The on-set drama hit a fever pitch when Spader actually staged a protest, refusing to step 1 foot out of his trailer until specific pages of the script were rewritten to his liking. The entire production ground to a halt, leaving the crew standing around while thousands of dollars drained from the budget, every minute skyrocketing the pressure on everyone involved. Panic mode set in, forcing producers Devlin and Emmerich to grab whatever pens they could find and start frantically rewriting scenes right there on the spot just to get the cameras rolling again. In the middle of this circus, Russell finally had enough and confronted Spader, demanding to know what the hold-up was, which led to Spader bluntly admitting that the dialogue was mortifyingly horrible. Russell's clapback was legendary, capturing the brutal, unvarnished truth of the film industry in a way only a veteran could. He admitted, "Yeah, of course it is horrible." He looked him dead in the eye and said, "That is exactly why they are paying you $1 million. If the script was actually brilliant, you would be doing this gig for free." It was the ultimate reality check. That moment perfectly summed up the vibe on set. Russell was embracing the pragmatic business side of being a movie star, while Spader was tortured by trying to maintain artistic integrity in a commercial cash grab. These massive tensions weren't just personal beefs. They were a symptom of the terrifying challenge of trying to make a massive sci-fi blockbuster without the safety net of a major studio. Every single delay didn't just mean overtime pay. It risked ballooning the cost so high that the entire project could have collapsed before it even hit theatres. Yet, despite the rocky start, the trailer tantrums and the clash of egos, both actors turned in iconic performances that helped Stargate rake in nearly $200 million globally. To put that in perspective, that massive haul was almost 4 times the movie's original production budget. Even with a messy script and behind-the-scenes screaming matches, the movie managed to strike a serious chord with audiences who loved the spectacle. But make no mistake, this blockbuster success was built on an incredibly fragile foundation of raw talent, massive tension, and sheer stubbornness from the people behind the camera. The insane casting story of Stargate just goes to show how major misunderstandings and personality conflicts can somehow coexist with massive creative victories. That volatile mix of brilliance and disaster wasn't just limited to the actors. It plagued every department, from the wardrobe to the special effects, each hiding its own nightmare stories. Just as the movie's portal swirled liquid magic with advanced technology, the human drama of casting and performance wove a chaotic, complex tapestry into the film's DNA. Coming up, we are going to dive into how the brutal desert environment and torture device costumes took the misery to a whole new level, pushing the cast and crew to their absolute breaking points. We are talking strictly about blistering heat, suffocating helmets and costumes that were basically hazardous materials. If the ego clashes were bad filming, the desert scenes in Stargate pushed the cast and crew into a physical survival mode, battling some of the most hellish conditions you can imagine on a movie set. We are talking about the Arizona desert, where temperatures skyrocketed past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with the heat refusing to back off even after the sun went down. It was so hot that plastic water bottles would literally melt into twisted shapes if left in the sun too long, forcing the crew to bury their drinks deep in the sand just to keep them from turning into hot tea. The technical equipment started failing left and right, cameras were jamming from the heat, and the actual film stock was warping inside the canisters because of the relentless temperatures. It was so dangerous that paramedics had to be on standby 24/7, watching the crew like hawks, because heat stroke and total exhaustion were genuine, life-threatening risks every single day. But nobody had it worse than the poor actors stuck playing the Horus guards who were facing a claustrophobic nightmare inside their costumes. Those iconic helmets were built from heavy industrial rubber, moulded over hard plastic frames covered in cool-looking serpent designs that unfortunately left zero room for air holes or visibility. With absolutely no eye slits, these performers were flying blind, unable to see a thing, which meant every step they took was a terrifying calculated risk to avoid tripping. The helmets were massive, weighing a ton, and measuring about 24 inches in every direction, and the process to get them on was a grueling ordeal that could take up to 6 hours. Once you were locked inside that rubber prison, getting out was a nightmare, making a simple bathroom break a logistical military operation that everyone dreaded. As if the suffocating desert heat wasn't enough, there were lights inside the helmets powered by actual batteries to make the eyes glow red, which just generated more heat right next to the actors' faces. It basically turned the inside of the helmet into a convection oven, raising the internal temperature to dangerous levels. It got so bad that actors were dropping like flies, nearly fainting on set from the lethal combo of the Arizona sun and their stifling airless costumes. Even in the massive battle scenes, you had extras running around in heavy robes, sprinting across scorching hot sand dunes, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit for the sake of the shot. Let me tell you, those costumes were straight up torture devices designed to look gorgeous on camera while absolutely wrecking the poor actors trapped inside them. It got so dangerous out there that the production had to constantly scramble their schedule, desperately dodging the lethal heat spikes just to keep the cast from collapsing. We are talking brutal call times at the crack of dawn, forcing everyone to work furiously just to wrap up before the afternoon sun turned the set into a literal oven. The crew basically became storm chasers, but for sunlight, obsessively racing the clock to catch that perfect golden hour glow before the desert unforgivingly went dark. Those few seconds of magical lighting were the only thing that made the alien atmosphere pop, and the only justification for the absolute hell the cast went through to get the shot. But here is where it gets really scandalous. The production was pulling some serious fast ones behind the scenes to fake those massive crowds you saw on screen. They were not about to blow their budget on real people, so they resorted to some of the cheapest tricks in the Hollywood playbook. Hiring hundreds of extras was way too expensive for the suits in charge, so they literally used sticks wrapped in rags and stuck them in the sand. Through the camera lens, these glorified scarecrows looked exactly like villagers, saving the studio thousands of dollars while fooling every single one of us in the audience. For the big battle scenes, they only hired about 200 real people and mixed them in with the sticks and green screens to make it look like a massive army. The set itself was a total diva, demanding just as much attention as the A-list stars. They built these massive, towering alien structures right out of the sand, mimicking ancient Egyptian vibes, but the maintenance was a nightmare. After every single take, a cleanup crew had to rush in with brooms and rakes to erase all the footprints, treating the sand like a crime scene to keep the illusion alive. And get this, they deliberately filmed in July, the hottest month of the year, just to avoid tourists and dune buggies ruining their shots. They basically chose physical suffering just to get some peace and quiet, allowing the cast to feel truly isolated on a hostile alien planet. If the heat was not enough, the creature costumes were a whole other level of disaster waiting to happen. They tried putting these massive prosthetic mammoth costumes on horses, but the animals freaked out and could not move naturally under the weight. So, in a bizarre twist, they built mini versions and strapped them onto dogs, which somehow sold the effect of giant alien beasts way better than the horses ever could. Even though those suits were heavy and miserable, they gave the movie a gritty realism that CGI just cannot replicate, balancing the spectacle with some serious practical struggle. The tension on set was palpable, with every costume and prop seemingly designed to push the actors to their breaking point. It was a constant battle between looking cool for the movie poster and actually surviving the physical strain of the shoot. Actors were walking blind in those masks, forced to memorise their steps and trust the crew with their lives while their brains were practically boiling. Every battle scene turned into a dangerous dance of endurance where one wrong step could have sent someone to the hospital. Honestly, it is a miracle that the crew managed to pull off these high-risk sequences without a major tragedy occurring on set. The exhaustion was real, and you can feel that frustration and fatigue bleeding into the performance, raising the stakes for everyone involved. The desert was not just a pretty background, it was a hostile villain that the production had to fight every single day. It was a relentless obstacle course that forced the team to get creative or go home empty-handed. That atmosphere of pure misery and challenge is exactly why the story feels so intense. The actors were not acting, they were surviving. But if you thought the filming was chaotic, the post-production phase was a total train wreck filled with missed deadlines and panic. The visual effects team was living on the edge, practically hyperventilating as the release date crept closer. Then, in a move that would make any producer scream, the editors dropped a bombshell request for 66 brand new effects shots just days before the deadline. A demand like that usually kills a movie, instantly sinking the whole project before it even hits theatres. But for this crew with their tight budget and ticking clock, it became the ultimate make or break moment for their careers. The VFX team had to pull off the impossible and finish a mountain of work in just 7 days with zero room for failure. These were not just throwaway shots. They were crucial for fixing plot holes and adding that blockbuster spectacle the studio desperately needed. Their secret weapon was the domino system, a rare piece of tech that let them see their work in real time, which was unheard of back then. A wizard named Mitchell Drain got his hands on this machine, bypassing the agonisingly slow rendering times that would have doomed the production. The team went into zombie mode, working 24 hours a day without sleep to crank out all 66 shots. Against all odds, they hit the 1-week deadline, and miraculously, every single shot made it into the final cut without looking like garbage. They were mashing up miniature pyramids, matte paintings, and explosions in a frenzied blitz to get it done. The editors were demanding perfection, forcing them to layer dozens of elements to trick the audience into believing this alien world was real. This chaotic last-minute scramble actually ended up making the movie look way more expensive than it actually was. It grounded all those crazy sci-fi concepts and made the story feel tangible and gritty. That final adrenaline-fueled push saved the entire movie, turning a potential flop into the sci-fi spectacle we know today. And the irony, the director Roland Emmerich hated digital effects at first and wanted to stick to old-school miniatures. But once Emmerich laid eyes on those initial tests where bullets literally froze dead in mid-air and digital experiments warped reality, he realised the cinematic game had changed forever. That single moment sparked a massive shift, blending gritty practical effects with digital magic to create visuals that were completely unheard of at the time. It became a fascinating tug-of-war between old-school craftsmanship and bleeding-edge technology that ultimately defined the unique aesthetic of Stargate. You have to remember, this movie was being produced when photochemical film was on its deathbed, but it was not dead yet. The team was still hauling around massive 35mm Panavision cameras and burning through Kodak stock, trying to pull off miracles without the safety net of modern digital pipelines. There was no fix it in post with instant playback or fancy colour grading like we take for granted in 2026. Instead, it was a logistical nightmare involving multiple animation houses sweating over every single frame, using optical printers and physical models to fake what computers could not fully do yet. It was a grueling, labour-intensive grind that demanded a level of patience and perfectionism that frankly still blows people's minds decades later. But while the tech was cool, the real fireworks were happening behind the scenes in the toxic dynamic between the director and his visual effects supervisor, Jeff Oken. The drama was legendary, with Oken reportedly getting hired, fired, and then rehired so many times during production that it became a running joke. Yet despite this chaotic workplace relationship, Okun's bold ideas and refusal to play it safe were exactly what drove the film's signature look. There is a famous story that Oken, fully expecting to get the axe one last time, brought a final water ripple test to Emmerich, and the director's attitude instantly flipped. Emmerich suddenly claimed he had never fired anyone, completely rewriting history because the visual effect was just that, undeniable and extraordinary. It just goes to show how messy, confusing yet weirdly productive their high-pressure collaboration really was. Those bullet time tests and that shimmering water ripple became the symbols of a changing industry, proving that digital experiments could finally stand toe-to-toe with practical techniques. Emmerich got so hyped on the possibilities that the set became a frantic laboratory of constant idea exchanges and last-minute improvements. Even when Okun was technically removed on paper, the production was still heavily relying on his genius right up until the final stages of the film. It is a classic Hollywood example of how massive egos and creative conflict can actually squeeze out a diamond under enough pressure, as the effects team scrambled to composite elements mixing footage shot at crazy high frame rates. With digital layers and physical miniatures, the old world of filmmaking collided spectacularly with the new one. They were relying on the domino system, a piece of tech that barely survived the 90s, as the fragile backbone keeping the movie's climax from falling apart during its most vulnerable moments. The demands were absolutely suffocating, but the success of these last-minute effect shots perfectly embodied the film's larger spirit of risky innovation and relentless, almost desperate determination. In the end, that visual triumph defined the audience's experience, creating a seamless blend of tangible miniatures and pioneering digital wizardry. That final aesthetic did not just save the movie, it paved the way for the next generation of sci-fi blockbusters to embrace hybrid methods, proving you need a human touch to make the computer stuff feel real. So from enduring searing desserts and claustrophobic helmets to racing against the clock, with groundbreaking effects, the story of Stargate reveals a production fueled by contradictions where total chaos somehow birthed cinematic history. But the on-set technical drama was nothing compared to the situation surrounding the film's enigmatic villain, Rahl, and the complex, haunting designs that eventually made him an unforgettable icon on the big screen. The casting of Jay Davidson as Ra is one of those bizarre Hollywood stories that was shaped entirely by chance and a whole lot of reluctance. Davidson was not even an actor originally. He was a fashion assistant in London who got discovered at a party in 1991 and accidentally became famous after an Academy Award nomination for The Crying Game. He was totally uncomfortable with the celebrity lifestyle and wanted to quit, so he tried to sabotage the Stargate offer by demanding a ludicrous $1 million salary. He figured they would laugh in his face, but to his absolute horror, the producers agreed immediately and cut the check. But throwing money at the problem did not fix the fact that this was a high-profile casting with a star who found the production incredibly difficult. Davidson struggled big time with memorising his lines, and tensions on set skyrocketed when his performance was not landing the way they hoped. It got so bad the crew had to hold up massive cue cards with phonetic spellings just to help him get through the dialogue scenes. To make matters worse, early test audiences responded poorly to Ra complaining that Kurt Russell's hero took down this so-called god way too easily. The feedback was brutal enough to send the filmmakers into a panic, forcing them to completely rethink the villain during post-production. Editors and visual effects artists had to go in and surgically reshape Ra into something that felt genuinely powerful and mysterious. They added those creepy glowing eyes, layered his voice to sound demonic, and cooked up the concept of an alien parasite inhabiting a human body. That post-production magic trick elevated Ra from a standard human bad guy into a terrifying godlike figure that anchored the film's mythology. Costume designer Joseph Porro reinforced this new identity with an insane wardrobe featuring velvet lame, leather fiberglass, and semi-precious stones. The flowing robes, ornate headdresses, and cobra-decorated panels created a regal, intimidating presence that masked the behind-the-scenes struggles. But even with the villain fixed, the production challenges were far from over. Jay Davidson was acting like a total diva on set, absolutely refusing to take out his nipple rings, which forced the camera crew to work overtime with lighting tricks just to hide them. To make matters worse, his personal assistant vanished into thin air, ramping up the drama to a whole new level. While the on-set drama unfolded, the sound team was scrambling to fix Ra's voice, in post-production completely rebuilding it with layered recordings, pitch modulation, and creepy echoes all, while David Arnold's haunting score did the heavy lifting to sell the vibe. They even had to go back in and slap on extra subtitles and clean up the alien chatter because no one knew what was going on. It turns out the early test audiences were totally lost, scratching their heads until the editors stepped in to clarify the messy plot. In the end, all that backstage chaos and post-production wizardry paid off, turning Ra into one of the most iconic and terrifying baddies in sci-fi history. It was the perfect storm of costume, drama, sound, engineering genius, and visual effects that turned a troubled production into a goldmine, laying the groundwork for the massive Stargate empire we know today. But the massive world of Stargate was not just about the characters or the drama. The sheer scale of the production was mind-blowing in its own right. It was driven just as much by incredibly smart, penny-pinching production hacks as it was by the flashy visual spectacle on screen. Next up, we are diving into the wild set designs and budget-saving tricks that made a fake alien planet look totally real without breaking the bank. Let's talk dirty secrets and budget hacks. To pull off this alien world, the production team took over the legendary Spruce Goose Dome in Long Beach, California. This place was originally built to house Howard Hughes' massive Hercules plane, so you know the scale was absolutely insane. Once the plane was moved out in 1992, it left behind a colossal indoor playground, perfect for filming a sci-fi epic. For 6 months, about 300 crew members sweated it out to build massive sets inside, including the Stargate Command and that creepy pyramid ship spanning an area bigger than 4 football fields combined. These massive practical sets gave the movie a blockbuster look and feel, all while keeping the accountants happy by avoiding a budget explosion. But even with the big sets, the filmmakers hit a wall when it came to cash, forcing them to slash the budget for hiring extra actors. Despite being short on funds, the crew came up with a genius, arguably hilarious way to solve the problem. To fake a massive crowd, they literally used stick figures dressed up in cloth robes to fill out the background. These cheap props in the background totally worked, tricking the audience into thinking there were thousands of villagers and workers in the distance. They mixed real extras from the big fight scenes with stand-ins and some clever green screen magic to make the battle look huge. This blending technique created the illusion of a cast of thousands while keeping the production costs surprisingly low. But it was not just the props. Using natural light played a huge role in giving the movie its distinct look. The crew was super picky about shooting times, waiting for that perfect golden hour when the low sun painted the sand and ruins in rich, warm colours. That short window of perfect light made the landscape look otherworldly, adding millions of dollars in visual value for free. To make the world feel even bigger, they went old school and relied on detailed miniature models. Artists crafted intricate miniature city towers and pyramid ships loaded with complex carvings and textures that looked amazing on camera. These miniatures looked authentic because they filmed them outdoors in real sunlight before compositing them with the live-action footage. Shooting in the blistering desert heat with a tight budget meant the crew had to improvise constantly just to get the shot. Between the massive Spruce Goose sets, the miniature photography, and those hilarious stick figure crowds, the whole production was a masterclass in ingenuity. These practical hacks allowed them to balance their massive ambition with the reality of their bank account. It helped create a totally believable alien civilization, proving that sometimes having no money forces you to be a cinematic genius. Moving on from the set hacks, the final chapter looks at how Stargate mixed practical effects with digital wizardry. This combo of real-world props and early computer magic is what cemented Stargate's legacy in sci-fi history. Let's talk about the legacy of that practical and digital magic. Stargate is basically the poster child for that awkward transition period in Hollywood when practical effects started holding hands with early digital tech. They leaned hard on physical models, miniatures, and handcrafted props to build everything from alien pyramids to sweeping desert cities. These real elements gave the movie a grounded, gritty vibe that the janky CGI of the early 90s just could not pull off on its own. But do not get it twisted, they were also jumping headfirst into the new world of digital effects. That iconic water ripple on the gate and the morphing helmet scenes showed off some pioneering software built just for this movie. They had to code it from scratch because the existing tools were nowhere near advanced enough to handle Roland Emmerich's vision. The slightly glitchy, imperfect look of the digital effects actually worked in their favour, adding a creepy alien vibe to the whole thing. Those serpent guard helmets are the perfect example of this hybrid style in action. They were heavy physical props with battery-powered glowing eyes enhanced later with layered compositing and morph effects to look seamless. The actors were basically blind inside those things, requiring intense choreography just to keep them from bumping into walls. The nightmare of the production mirrored the experimental nature of the special effects work. Visual effects boss Jeffrey Oken had some wild ideas that caused plenty of drama, but those conflicts pushed the film's innovation to the next level. The production crew was not playing around capturing those mind-blowing special effects using classic 35mm Panavision cameras and gritty photochemical processes. This was not some easy drag-and-drop job. It forced them to pull off painstaking optical printing and grueling frame-by-frame precision work that would drive most people crazy. They built a universe you could practically touch, relying on elaborate costumes, physical props, and handcrafted miniatures before polishing it all off with cutting-edge digital effects. That risky blend of old-school craftsmanship and digital experimentation is exactly why Stargate remains a visual masterpiece that puts modern CGI fests to shame. It really highlights how the tightest creative restrictions and on-set drama often push filmmakers into creating permanent, iconic, artistic expressions. The scandalous true story of Stargate reveals how total production chaos and sheer willpower can somehow come together to produce timeless cinematic magic. From a rocky start that screamed box office flop, to revolutionising visual effects and delivering unforgettable characters, the film's legacy is still shaking up the industry. If you loved getting the inside scoop on these Hollywood secrets, do me a huge favour and hit that like button right now. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss another juicy deep dive into the hidden history of your favourite blockbusters and TV shows.